fashion and retail background to really affect this perception shift and this change of what people think Detroit to be. And then I really wanted to represent sort of this more contemporary cosmopolitan feel of what the city has to offer. And that's not to erase the gritty nature of the city. That's not to erase the culture here, but it's to create a different perspective. And I think there is this resistance to new ideas and fresh ideas as a newcomer coming into the city. I think that I've received all type of feedback. I've been yelled at by people, black, white, and in between. And I think programs like Bill gave me the opportunity to really test my idea and test this product in the communities. I did Eastern Market, I did Dally in the Alley. So you're literally standing at your table with your T-shirt, and the community is coming up to you and telling you how they feel about it. And so, I'm grateful that it was something that people wanted. I wouldn't be in business if it wasn't a sentiment that was felt by a wide demographic of people. And I think, the arts has a way of really representing what's happening in the culture at this time, and I'm grateful to have been able to do that here in Detroit. So I don't know.
Okay. I'm trying my best not to direct or drive.
Okay.
So all of the panelists can be real. If they're going to be honest with you, they're going to tell you that at 3:30 this morning I sent them an email telling them what this panel was about. And I literally kept them in the dark until now because I really do just want to have a conversation, and I want to get to know and learn as much as I can and not direct where this has to go. So I think the stories you're hearing are this is just who these people are and kind of how Detroit has affected them and where they stand in the city today. Shay, what's up?
What's going on, everybody? I'm Shannon Oyewole. Recently moved here 2 years ago from DC. I'm originally from Columbia, Maryland, which is a suburb of Baltimore, and came here to work for a firm called Invest Detroit. Invest Detroit is known for a lot of real estate development and commercial loans going on in the central business district. Then within Invest Detroit, we have 2 venture capital funds where we focus on tech startups throughout the state of Michigan. So my primary functions are trying to find deals, due diligence, and a lot of community outreach through our different programming. So those are my core functions. How I got interested in Detroit and how I really got here, I would say I had been when I was interning in Brooklyn, summer 2013. New York Times came out with this article that completely just shitted on the city. And I remember reading it.
It's technical time.
Is this PG?
No, I started by swear. You can say whatever you want.
So yeah, I remember reading that article and then sort of sending it to a few of my friends that are from Detroit, and we had some ongoing conversations about what was going on in Detroit from their perspective, from what I was reading, blah, blah, blah. At that point in time, I had no interest in ever coming to Detroit. It wasn't, I remember just reading the article, it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then, you know how the world works sometimes. Next thing I know, I find a job opportunity that happens to be in Detroit, and here I am. So interesting enough, I've always been super focused on development. My undergrad degree was in international development, specifically business. And then in high school, I interned for my local government, and I worked on legislation to sort of redevelop my suburb and make it more so a urban suburb, if you will, that's more connected to DC, Baltimore with a subway station, blah, blah, blah. So that's always been sort of like in the back of my head, how can we develop communities for the betterment of everybody? So when I saw the opportunity to work for Invest Detroit in the city of Detroit, I kind of jumped at it. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. A lot of my work is through Invest Detroit, and then I do a lot of things on the side, primarily just having events to bring folks together, sort of with the same idea of like native and newcomers. Like I know people here that recently moved here, and that's like all I know. Then I know people here that have been here for a while and just came back, and they know a completely different network that I do. So what we try to do is just fuse those two together and bring folks together. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Luther Keith is going to kind of round out our panelist introduction.
We'll get the oldest guy up here to
You know what I didn't want is for you to have such a historical perspective. I'm not going to say you're old, but historical perspective on the city and the development. You've also
mature, brother, mature. Season, verse 2. Okay. First of all, I'm just saying I'm in awe of this, and all these stories here are just amazing stories of folks coming here. I am a native Detroiter and grew up right in the heart of the city on a little street called Columbus between Lewitt and Lawton, 48206, around the corner of Trying to Black Madonna. So I can tell folks I am from Linwood. A lot of it is rubbed off to some people. They would have no idea, but I grew up on Linwood, Lawton, West Grand Boulevard. So that's my neighborhood. And I still live in Detroit, educated all in Detroit at Catholic schools. But I'm still in Detroit. There's so many things here. I spent 30 years as a professional journalist here in Detroit, and I was a sports writer. I covered Magic Johnson High School, tell you how old that goes back. But I was a writer, columnist, editor, all that other stuff. And so I've seen Detroit good and bad at its zenith and at its worth, and now as its evolution. And it's really interesting to see it evolve. Arise Detroit, and everybody up here seems to have got here almost organically, that you ended up here. And even though I grew up in Detroit, I got at this station in my life organically, because I thought I was going to be a journalist forever. But there are other things intervening. So 10 years ago, I decided it was time to move on. And when I was in college for the Detroit News, I would write stories about Detroit and its problems, how we move forward, etc. A lot of times I would get calls, emails from white folks who would say, why aren't black folks doing anything about your problems? Then the black folks would call me and say, we are trying to do a block club or a youth group. Can you publicize this? Can you help us? And it occurred to me that there are really hundreds of organizations all over the city working like crazy every day. That either people didn't know about it or weren't hearing the stories of the impact. So the idea that was sent to me, because I only have one liberal arts degree, I don't have that. But an idea occurred to me that we needed some place to make more people aware of what all these little groups are doing, and to support those groups. So this idea for Arise Detroit was essentially that how can we create an organization that provides some sort of assistance to all of them and make people see and hear those stories. Because every movement has to have a communication vehicle, a story. If you go back to drums and the Indians, or smoke signals, or Christians in the Bible, whatever it might be.
Revolution has to be televised.
Yeah, exactly. So Arise Detroit was this idea that created an institution that would help everybody. And so how could a tutoring program that only had 10 folks get 20? How could a neighborhood cleanup that only had 15 get 30? How could an organization that's trying to reform a neighborhood get hundreds of people involved? Or how could we get their stories out to the media? So Rise Detroit essentially was created to, in our elevators, we're a coalition now of 400 organizations, churches, block clubs, community groups, and our role is to promote volunteerism, community activism, and positive media images to create a better Detroit. When we started 10 years ago, 11 years ago, there was not this buzz about the neighborhoods of Detroit, because right after our first year, we had to stand over the Kilpatrick administration and the evolution, populations decline, and we just had the story about Detroit's now population being the lowest since 1850. But it's interesting, this dynamic turn, because when we started, there was not this buzz about Detroit is the place to be. Exactly the opposite. So we've seen the evolution of the first 4 or 5 years of Rise Detroit, and I was on Dateline with Chris Hansen, and riding with him. He stepped in my car, and the first thing he asked me was, "Has your home ever been burglarized?" And I took him all over Detroit, showed him good, bad, and ugly, but somehow the only bad and ugly ended up in the piece. But nevertheless, we've seen an evolution in Detroit where people from all over now are not just coming to they're sticking Detroit on stuff because they think it will sell more, it has more cachet. And in this process of Arise Detroit, we are working with all groups all over the city, people from all over the world, across the country. We created something 10 years ago, and I have flyers here showing that ties into all of these different cross currents, if you will, something called a Rise Detroit Neighborhoods Day, because we felt that our work was in the neighborhoods with the neighborhoods people. We had all these people. I'm talking about the Sorrento Block Club, the Montgomery Block Club, the Seneca Fisher Streets, the Maccabees, of that phrase used all over the city. Not just neighborhood groups that were chosen by foundations, and that's not a bad thing, but some are and some aren't. So we created this day. You know, Detroit, we love the big downtown events. And I guess River Days is coming. We got the fireworks, Winter Blast, and all, and that's great. Detroit, but we said we want to do something.
Detroit Startup Week.
Right.
I mean,
Detroit
being honest, like we're in the 7th
right
too. You
so
know,
our goal was to say, what can we do to lift up and showcase the work that people in the neighborhoods are doing all the time? Because people are working even when you don't see it on the front page. People are working even when you don't see it on top of Fox too. They're working all over this city every day, 24/7. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a day, and it's always the first Saturday of August. And this year, the 10th will be August the 6th. We're going to create a day. We're going to ask churches, block clubs, community groups, fraternities, sororities, whatever, in your own neighborhood on this day, you do something to show how you are making a difference in your community, what your community needs and wants to do. We aren't going to tell you what to do. We aren't going to tell you where to do it. It's totally up to you. And so what we did that first year, we had 55 events all over the city on the same day, which was pretty amazing. Festivals, concerts, health fairs, and this has grown to literally involve hundreds of organizations. Last year, we set a record of 256 registered events all over the city in every zip code. I don't know any city does that. But what it does, it's a day where people themselves are invested in creating their own work, their own pride. Now, what happened as a result of that, people from all over have come in and been part of this and volunteering. And you've seen people from the suburbs, people from other states come in. And as people come into Detroit, they're looking to make those connections. And one of the things about making those connections, we'll talk more about this later, is making that connection the right way, making that connection with respect, because there are ways to go in. Like I said, we were here before you discovered us, you know. So it's really important. But what we have seen is to be a catalyst for this, and there is this dynamic now about including everybody. But Detroit had value before. It had value now, but it has value in the future. And not because it's validated by other folks, but we need other folks. And I'm not one to push back against folks who want to come in and help. But it's an education process. And I'll close with this little story anecdote that my mother told me this story when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and it stayed with me. I never realized I'd be telling it, but it makes the point about, I think, about what's happening with Detroit today. And some of you may know this as the story of the Little Red Hen. My mother taught it to me as the chicken who baked the bread. And it goes like this. One day, Mrs. Chicken gets up in the barnyard. It's a bright, sunny day, and she said, "This is a great day to bake some bread." So I wonder who's going to help me bake the bread. So she goes around the barnyard. She asks Miss Cow, would you help me bake the bread? She said, "No, I'm sure I could." Ask the hog, "Will you help me bake the bread today?" "No, I got some good slop today." Ask the barnyard dog, "I'm chasing squirrels today." And she goes all around, and none of the animals want to help her bake the bread. So he goes back to her little chicken coop. She's kind of depressed and starts baking her bread. She got her ingredients. After a while, all the animals start sniffing. They say, "What is that smell? Something is smelling really good." Didn't Ms. Chicken say she's going to bake some bread today? I said, "Yeah, let's go over here." So, sure enough, she comes out of the chicken coop. She got 2 loads of steaming hot bread, and it is smelling really good. So they all say, "Miss Chicken, that bread smells so good. Can we have some of that bread?" She says, "No, I think I'm going to eat this bread all by myself." Now, move forward 40 years, 50 years to Detroit of today, and what this story means to me now as it relates to neighborhoods and this conversation is that all this time, when Detroit was written off, people in the neighborhoods were baking bread. They were still working in the neighborhoods. They're still trying to move their children forward, still trying to hold the community together, not knowing what the future, but they were baking bread, regardless of what Your Times said, Wall Street Journal said, or what NBC News said. They were going to break the bread, whether you want to or not. But guess what happened? Things started to change, and suddenly other people started smelling bread. Dan Gilbert started smelling some bread. Myers started smelling some bread. Nike was just over here smelling bread. But they're smelling it because, again, people here held this city together through the bad times, through the hard times. A lot of things have changed. So at the end of the day, we can all have the bread, we can all eat the bread, but we should respect everybody who was baking the bread, not just the folks who started. We want them all. So, as it relates to this conversation, I think everything has value. Respect the old, respect you, and let's learn from each other and move forward.
Great. So, thank you. I'm gonna, we can do that. That's why I didn't have you go first. I think that one of the things, and I told Ben this,